I'm Jeremy Loffredo for Rebel News back home in New York City. I just returned home from Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City, a supposedly prestigious research hospital in the heart of America's Midwest. Children's Mercy's influence in the Midwest stretches far and wide, with it constantly buying up smaller hospitals and with over 18 satellite locations across the U.S. But something strange or off is going on here. The hospital takes or medically kidnaps children at an extraordinary rate, which has the community concerned. Upon arriving in Kansas City, I was primarily focused on the single horrific case of Evelyn Young. Evelyn Young, who, according to official progress reports, was healing quickly from the symptoms of her nephrotic syndrome with the help of only generic steroids, the hospital decided against the parents' wishes to treat her with a dubious and obviously dangerous pharmaceutical named Cellcept, which caused her brain to swell and temporarily blinded her.
I was rubbing her back from when she was vomiting, and she was like, "Mom, where are you?" And I was right in front of her face. So, Cellcept made her blind, but the blindness was actually from the encephalopathy that Cellcept caused. Just because of the Cellcept that I said, something doesn't feel right for my kid, and they completely dismissed me. And then it happened.
The parents attempted to take her out of the hospital's care and go to another hospital before Children's Mercy could do more damage. But the hospital had other plans. The Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City is a controversial research institution that has effectively kidnapped dozens of kids after considering their parents who question the hospital's treatment decisions or ask for a second medical opinion as unfit to parent. Their latest victim is Jessica Young's 10-year-old daughter, Evelyn, who was effectively given to the state of Missouri after Jess made clear she wasn't satisfied with the hospital's protocols. Now Evelyn, like many other victims of Children's Mercy, is on the verge of going into foster care. Please go to SaveEvelyn.com and help us fund the legal battle to return Evelyn to her loving family and take her out of the hands of the state. The research hospital decided to get the state involved and revoke custody rights of Evelyn's parents, Justin and Jess, using their emotional reaction to Evelyn's hospital-caused worsened state as justification to the claim that they were not emotionally fit to parent. In slang, the hospital gaslit them. While this is an interesting story on its own, highlighting the giant overreach by government and powerful health institutions over families, I soon found out that the hospital's protocols are more sinister and nefarious than I originally understood. In the Midwest, there's an entire community of parents that contacted me who've had their children medically kidnapped by this specific hospital. It's such a pervasive issue that Missouri State Senator Mike Searpot introduced legislation to protect families from Children's Mercy abduction.
Let me tell you something I've learned these past few months. I've met and discussed this issue with several attorneys that worked in this area, in the Kansas City area. They've created a phrase about it. The term is abducted by Children's Mercy Hospital. Imagine that. It's a real thing, abducted by Children's Mercy Hospital.
While in Kansas City, I managed to interview other families who found themselves as victims of this behemoth children's research hospital. Among the most harrowing is the case of Tiffany Adams, and it's extraordinarily similar to the case of Evelyn Young. Despite her son being in outpatient care of Children's Mercy for 4 years, the health of her son was not improving. It was actually getting worse. In a meeting with all of his doctors, she pleaded with them to eliminate or at least lessen the amount of pharmaceutical drugs her son was on. After they declined to do anything of the sort, she attempted to move his care to a different hospital. Soon after, the hospital and state took full custody of her special needs son and effectively tortured him.
Yeah, so they took Jackson, they put him in the hospital. Jackson was absolutely terrified. He had never spent an hour there by himself. So he was terrified. Jackson tried to pick up the phone to call me, to ask me where I was at. So the nurse then came and took the phone out of his room and told him he had to stay in his room. Again, he was freaking out. He was scared. At that point, he decided to run down the stairwell and pull the fire alarm because he thought if he got everybody distracted, he could escape and get home. Well, when they caught him, they then restrained him to his bed. And then they put a pull-up on a child who doesn't need one. He's always went to the bathroom since he was 18 months old, and wouldn't come take him to the restroom. Only time he was allowed unhandcuffed was when they were sitting in the room watching him eat. So he pooped his pants, was screaming. He said, for a long time, that was his exact words. Nobody would come change his pull-up. So finally he screamed, "I shit my pants," and was screaming at the top of his lungs. And somebody finally came in his room to discover he had a bleeding rash on his butt. That's unacceptable.
It's torturous.
Absolutely. You don't do that. I mean, this is all after the Dr. Hoffman that had made the hotline report stood in his room for over 8 hours and tortured this kid and told him that he would never ever see us again.
Another mom victim of Children's Mercy explained to me how the medical behemoth's influence obviously corrupts previously innocent and ethical pediatricians by buying out their practice and effectively turning them into agents that facilitate medical kidnapping.
Children's Mercy took over the clinics at KU Med Center. And so one of our KU Med doctors then was employed by Children's Mercy. But I was very nervous. We have an amazing pediatrician at KU Med who is a KU Med pediatrician, has nothing to do with Children's Mercy. And he said, it's okay to, you can see her, we're good. I'm, right here under the same roof. Yeah, I went into that appointment and I knew something was off.
So this doctor you were completely comfortable with was employed by a different person and then became under the umbrella of Children's Mercy, and the questions that they were asking you, everything became suspect.
Very suspect, so she was asking all these questions and, okay, give me a timeline of this, that, and the other. And then within a day, it was a day and a half later, I had DCF at my door.
According to many parents that I spoke to, whether they were able to eventually get their children back by hiring tons of lawyers or not, this was a general consensus.
Children's Mercy has ruined my life and my children's lives. They can never take away the PTSD, the trauma. Trauma can never be repaired. You can work through it, but they could never make up for that. What they can do is start holding themselves accountable. They have ruined my life. They've ruined my children's lives. They put my son, who has very high medical needs, at risk. They took away his independence. They took away his voice. He was able to speak so much before he went into custody.
Evelyn Young is the most recent victim of this medical kidnapping. But why Evelyn? Her father explained that the hospital was more concerned with the fact that Evelyn is entirely unvaccinated and being homeschooled, more than they were concerned with her current medical condition, which the hospital made worse by giving her brain swelling and partial blindness.
Also in the reports, we homeschool, and that was in there a lot. And I'm just curious, when they report on other kids, if they know, will they go to public school? Will they, I'm just not sure why that is an important note. Her education status when we're here for medical reasons, not educational reasons.
Upon arrival, last month, the family had already ruffled some of the feathers of doctors and researchers at Children's Mercy by refusing to enroll their daughter in an NIH-funded research study. The study would have collected genetic data from Evelyn over the course of 3 years and would have run dozens of tests on her over that period of time. While everyone explained that it was entirely safe, the last page of the consent form explained that if the test subject were to be injured or adversely damaged as a result of the NIH study, care would be available at none other than Children's Mercy for, quote, usual charge. Payment for fixing any damage the study causes would be, quote, your responsibility. One wonders why the hospital isn't willing to pay for any damages caused by a study that is supposedly extraordinarily safe. Right now, Evelyn is in the custody of the state. When and if Evelyn is discharged from the hospital, she'll go into the foster care system. Thankfully, Rebel is helping the family out with lawyers. We already have a veteran lawyer on the case. We couldn't do this without your help. So please head to SaveEvelyn.com and donate whatever you can to help the family get their daughter back. That's SaveEvelyn.com. The foster care system in the U.S. is notoriously corrupt. Similar to how police officers have quotas on giving certain amount of parking tickets, the Child Protective Services bureaucracy is incentivized to take children from families, whether or not it's warranted. Georgia State Senator Nancy Schaefer, who was mysteriously murdered, devoted the end of her career to investigating the corrupt practices of Child Protective Services. Her office published a report titled The Corrupt Business of Child Protective Services. Her report concludes that caseworkers and social workers are very often guilty of fraud. They withhold and destroy evidence, they fabricate evidence, and they seek to terminate parental rights unnecessarily. However, when charges are made against Child Protective Services, the charges are ignored. Her report also concluded that there are state employees, lawyers, court investigators, court personnel, and judges. There are psychologists and psychiatrists, counselors, caseworkers, and therapists. All are looking to the children in state custody to provide job security. The report pointed to numbers from the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect, which reported that 6 times as many children died in foster care than in the general public, and that once removed to official safety, these children are far more likely to suffer abuse, including sexual molestation, than in the general population. Stephen Krasner, an independent investigative journalist, also published a report on CPS titled Families Separated for Money Incentives at the Hand of Child Service Entities. He wrote, "When you become aware of the incidents and stories that enter public awareness by parents blowing the whistle as to what transpires, you often have to pause in disbelief. How can such things happen where children are put in bad situations because of funding opportunities, power trips, and people's job security? They happen in part because these environments' transparency is non-existent or an illusion whereby players can act with impunity." Please help save Evelyn from this predatory system at saveevelyn.com. We're only about 30% of the way to our goal of 1,000 donations.